We are taught to see the world as a finished product, a static history set in stone. But what if the world isn't a monument, but a design? To understand the present, we have to dismantle the systems that built it. This is Architect Archives. Hello, welcome to Architect Archives. I'm your host, Rosemary. Let's get into it. So, today I'm going to do things a little bit different. I always like when I'm teaching people things, I like to ask questions because growing up, quite often they told us not to ask questions and to just accept what is being told as given facts. Now, everybody's all grown up, everybody's gotten older, and the scales have quite literally fallen from a majority of our eyes. Why? Because things have happened in the last 100 years or so, but specifically in the last, 10 years, 11 years, that have been mind blowing, that have been quite catastrophic, and that makes you, in fact, ask questions. So, I'm going to go right in with the most hard hitting question that I have. I'll fill with the top of my brain. Why is it that there are so many lakes and rivers and water in America? Let me add on to that question. Why is it that there are so many indigenous tribes and people that have been displaced on the land that they own and have been on for thousands of years? Why is that a thing? Why do they have these abnormally large dams, bridges, lakes, rivers, where at one half of those at one point in time there was a town, a living, thriving town up under the waters before the waters got there? Why is it that America is in fact the country with the most pyramids in the entire world? Why is it that there are so many different heralds to ancient Egypt in America? There are actually, okay, so in Africa, Sudan is the country with the most pyramids. And even still, America has the most. Most of America's pyramids are hidden. So, how do we know that America has the most pyramids? Nature does not perform and give you fully made, mathematically correct pyramids. Whoever told you that, if somebody did tell you that, that was a lie. We have to start asking questions. Why is it that Tennessee, yes, I know, Tennessee is named after all of these places in ancient Egypt, from the ancient worlds, from the ancient times? And then you had the world fairs where they had all of these wonderful, marvelous, beautiful, highly advanced technology and buildings, just for it to get burned down or torn down within a year or two after spending millions and what would be billions of today's dollars on making these concepts. Why don't we still do that? Strange. Strange. How come all of our greatest minds, the greatest minds that we have, all of them, say that their knowledge either came from others, they never did specify what the others were, from people who came before them, so historians, ancient history, or that the knowledge that they imparted was in fact not new knowledge, it was just new for the time, meaning that it is all ancient knowledge? Explain that to me. Why do we put so much focus on ancient Greek and ancient Roman cultures, ancient Egyptian cultures, ancient Mesopotamian cultures, ancient Sumerian cultures. Why do we put so much emphasis on that? It's almost as if they don't want us to focus or look into or study the cultures that came before that, because the cultures that came before the Sumerians, before the Greeks, before the Romans, those cultures were even more advanced. They were more advanced than the advanced cultures, ancient cultures that we study today, right? So they were more advanced than the Sumerians, more advanced than the Greeks, and more advanced than the Romans, more advanced than the Egyptians, the Mesopotamians, that whole little area. Yeah, they were more advanced. Okay, they traveled everywhere across the globe. Stay with me. These cultures were more advanced. But they don't want you to focus on those. Matter of fact, those aren't even taught in mainstream history. These are subjects that are strictly taught in alternative history or conspiracy theories. But at this point and in this day and age, I think we've been through enough stuff to realize that those conspiracy theories, they aren't really conspiracy theories, and those alternative history, they're not. Is it really alternative histories, or is it histories that they don't want us to know? I mean, they have to acknowledge it because it's been discovered. Sorry, it's been discovered. It's been found. They know what they know, but we don't know what they know. In order to even find out about what they know about the real ancient cultures, 10,000, 11,000, 12,000, all the ones before the Younger Dryas period, right after the Younger Dryas periods, those like gaps of history that we have, just like 300 years missing here, 600 years missing there, 500 years missing there, those little gaps. Why aren't we talking about that? Everybody always gets hung up on the biblical flood, the Sumerian flood, the Middle Eastern flood, the American flood. I bet you didn't know they had floods in the big catastrophic flood in America, did you? It was everywhere at different points in time and different points in history, right? Large chunks of civilization were just wiped off the map. Not saying all of civilization. Obviously, some people remained. Obviously, some people survived because they lived to tell the tale, right? Obviously, people outside of what area it was that was getting flooded, they knew about what was going on because they looked out one day and it was just sand, desert, island, whatever. They looked out another day and it's just water as far as the eye can see. Why is that? Why is it that there are at least 20 different ancient cultures before the Sumerians that speak about the time before no moon, when there was no moon? They speak of the time when the clouds were close to the ground. Matter of fact, like the clouds are getting closer and closer and closer every day, right? When the clouds were closer to the ground. When the clouds and the trees intermingled. Why is that? See, these are the questions that we're not asking, right? And there's only 3 reasons. 1, you don't care, you don't want to know, you're just trying to live your life, and that's the problem. 2, you believe what has been force-fed to you since you were a child. That's also still a problem. 3, we won't even get into 3. Okay, you have to ask questions, and that's not it. That's not it. I'm gonna switch it up a little. Okay, explain to me how, in a culture and a time where all of our great inventions had been lost to time, so we had wooden ships and things of this nature, right? Horse and buggy type technology. Explain to me, how is it we've found dinosaur bones, we found this, that, but we haven't found Not a single slave ship. What happened to all the slave ships? Excuse me. The hundreds of slave ships and the thousands of people that were packed tighter than a can of sardines, mind you. The thousands of people that were transported all around the world. Where's the slave ships? Where did they go? We can find dinosaur bones, funerals, graves, old plants, bugs, everything else from thousands and millions of years ago. Where's the slave ships? Where are they? Where are they? So let me ask you something. Did they really transport all of those slaves over? Or did they enslave the black people that were already there? Because let's think about it. Black people existed in America before slavery. You listen to me? People with my skin tone existed in America before slavery. People darker than me existed in America before slavery. Dark-toned people existed in the UK before slavery. They thrived, as a matter of fact. Moors, black people, whatever you want to call it, yeah, we thrived. We ran the world. All the continents. Everywhere. Ancient times, modern times, all the way up until slavery started, we were there. Hey. You never wonder why the indigenous populations of all the countries, they're so dark-skinned. They are dark-skinned. They have a few indigenous people of some countries, mostly in Asia, who are not. They're more on the paler side. They're also Asian. Where's the slave ships? Where did they go? And no, I'm not saying that slavery didn't happen, because obviously it did, but also just as obviously, every culture that we have record for going back 8,000 years has had slavery. Doesn't matter what color you are. It doesn't even matter. They had slavery. What's even more interesting is the whole word slavery came from the ancient Romans, who used to capture and enslave people from the Caucasus Mountains to be slave laborers. Civilizations, countries, towns, cities that they conquered, that was slave labor. Africa, tribes that captured other tribes and survived, that was slave labor. Asia, all over Asia, for thousands of years, if you were captured by an enemy tribe, if you were captured by a different kingdom, your chances were two things: slavery in one form or the other, or death. Unless you happen to be one of the lucky people who escaped. Native Americans. If your tribe was overtaken by another tribe, there was a very high chance that they were either going to die or they were going to be taken in as slaves. Okay? The thing is, I don't think most people are understanding is, okay, slavery has been a thing for thousands of years. Yes. 100%. 1,000%. Most of the time, slavery, they are enslaving people of the land that they've taken. Wrap your head around that. Pause. Stop. Listen. I'm going to say it again. Most of the time, historically, when it comes to slavery, the people who are enslaved are the people who lost the war and lost their land. Where are the slave ships? Where are they? Historically, it has been proven that history belongs to the victors, meaning this should be a really easy concept. We'll use America starting off. America, land of the free, home of the brave, before a single European person stepped on over on this land. It was full of black and brown skinned people of all tones and all shades. Where are those brown skinned and black skinned people today? They're on their reservations. Why are they on their reservations instead of all over the land that they owned, that their ancestors built, tended to? Why? Because their land was stolen. It was taken from them. They were enslaved. They were forced to assimilate and then made out to be problems of society. What happened to the Mexicans? The Mexicans were here. They were part of the brown-skinned people. They were part of the brown-skinned community that is indigenous and native to America, North America specifically, because we already know about South America. To North America, they were indigenous. Here, what happened to them? They were pushed out. They were pushed into Mexico. They were assimilated, forced to assimilate. They were murdered. They were enslaved. What happened to the black-skinned Native Americans that were indigenous to America before a single European stepped foot in America? They were enslaved. They were assimilated. They were murdered. What happened to the land? You're living on it. Yes, you, right now. You're living on it. You're living on it because 200 years ago, some people came over here and decided that the land that these people have been living on for thousands of years was first of all, it was undiscovered. Because clearly, even though they had millions of people living here, it was an undiscovered country, first and foremost. And so then they moved in and they took it. They took it and enslaved the people. Here's the thing. Are you noticing the pattern? The pattern is take, assimilate, enslave, kill, rebirth. And that is the story of every single nation. But the thing is, and you want to know, I really feel like that's why they want to stop teaching it in school. They want to stop teaching that slavery didn't exist and that they didn't bring these thousands of millions of people over to America and all around the world. Because did they? Did they, or did they enslave all the native inhabitants? Take their land, force them to teach them how to grow on their own land, take their land, kill them, assimilate them. Not saying that some people didn't go through some terrible shit. Excuse my French. They did. We know they did. What I am saying is, once again, questions. These are questions. Where's the slave ships? Where are the millions of people that were transported across the world? Now, there's millions of people now. Millions of people packed tighter than a can of sardines. You should have some proof, right? They made multiple voyages. Multiple voyages. Where's the ships? Oh, you think those are some heavy hitting questions? Don't you worry, I got more. Next up, let's take it easy for this next one. Human beings. I am allegedly a human. You are allegedly a human. That is established. What is not established is exactly how many different species, you heard me, species of humans that have existed. First of all, I think it is extremely cocky of us to assume that we're the greatest of human civilization, of civilization in general, knowing that there are other human species that existed before us. The Denisovans, I think that's how you say it. Denisovans. Denisovans, right? They were here. Matter of fact, they died out in our timeline. So Homo sapiens, us, or I think they died out in our timeline. Like, they were dying out when we were coming up, if that makes sense. Some of them interbred with humans like us, with Neanderthals, and with each other. The Denisovans were huge. They were what you would call giants. Now, don't you think that it's curious that science has acknowledged the fact that Denisovans existed, thrived, had their own communities, intermingled with other human species, humanoid species, should we say. But they don't acknowledge the fact that giants exist today. Now, we do know, again, that they intermingled, and we know this because we have people today who have trace amounts of Denisovan, Neanderthal, Homo sapien DNA. They also have another, I don't remember the name. There is an island, and on this island, the people who have lived there for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, they never moved, they've been there, used to talk about a group of mini humans that lived up in the mountains. So when I say mini humans, I guess little people. So like the tallest one would be like 3.5 feet, but it was a whole civilization of them that used to come down out of the mountain, used to terrorize them, scare them, steal their food, etc. Just mess with them, basically. And anybody who visited this island, went to this island, heard the stories, lived there, whatever, they knew about these folk stories, about these legends. But you know what I find is interesting? They found the skulls and bodies of this subset of humans that used to exist. Kind of like elves. I digress. They have other humans, humanoid creatures like ourselves, who existed before Homo sapiens. Right? Why do we not talk about them? Because they are also a very prominent part of history. They also are a very prominent part of what was left behind, of what we don't remember, or what was erased. Because we are not, in fact, the pinnacle of humanity. This is, in fact, not the best humanity has ever been. This is, in fact, not the most advanced humanity has been. Maybe the most destructive, for sure. For sure, one of the most destructive. But not the most advanced. Alright, see, I told you I wasn't going to go too hard. But I have some more questions to make you think. Let's go biblical. Let's talk about Abraham. So, this is just for all the Abrahamic religions. You believe in the Bible. Abraham, Noah, the Great Flood, all of these lovely little things. Here's what I want to tell you. Noah was Mesopotamian, which was right next door to the Sumerians. Guess what the Mesopotamians and the Sumerians had? You guessed it. They had a flood story that occurred at least 1,000 years before Abraham was even born. Definitely before Noah existed. Abraham grew up learning about this flood story. Abraham grew up learning about the creation story, which isn't terribly different. It's a little different, not terribly different from the biblical creation story. Yes. Matter of fact, all of the stories in the Old Testament most of the stories, at least the ones that Abraham is responsible for, and he's responsible for a good chunk of them because he's the one that started the Judaism slash Israelite movement. He was the founding father. So he taught and gathered. And those turned into Jews, who turned into Christians, who turned into modern day Christians, with a lot of blood, murder, essay, and everything else in between. So if we know that, why are we not questioning what Abraham was learning? And his origins, and his backstory, and the stories that he grew up on? Is it because we just don't want to know? Are we scared of what we're going to find out? I think it's interesting. So, I just want to take a little break before I keep going on, because I have a few more questions. And again, this is a bit different, I know, but I really want, these are the questions that we should be asking. And we're not. Well, y'all aren't. I am. I've never been the one to just blindly accept what I was taught, or what I was told. I have questions. And you know what? I lied. Why is knowledge so bad? You ever notice that? Like, biblically, knowledge is wrong. Right? It's wrong. Because a snake came in and told Eve to eat the apple. And who said it was an apple anyway? But whatever. Told Eve to eat the apple. Eve gained knowledge, and that was the problem. What is that man's name? Ancient Greek? Roman? I don't remember. Prometheus? You know, he was a angel, if you will. He was a god, if you will. Came and gave us knowledge. How to do fire, how to cook, etc. Ancient Sumerians, entities came and they gave us knowledge. But in all of modernity, actually, but in all modern religions, knowledge is frowned upon. You're not supposed to ask questions. You're not supposed to ask questions. In school, if it doesn't make sense, you're not supposed to ask questions. In church, if it doesn't make sense, you're not supposed to have questions. I have questions. And why is knowledge so bad? Could it be that knowledge is so bad because the more that you learn, the less they're able to control you? Could it be that religion and government and politics and even down to the basics, agriculture is a controlling mechanism, so humanity in general can be controlled, and the people who are actually in power have the ability to do what they want to do, whether or not it is for the greater good of others, because they have control. And the ones that they can't control usually end up, or they're just crazy, or according to this new law, they're terrorists. What's wrong with knowledge? Why is it that only the elites, the rich, the powerful are the ones with access to knowledge? Okay, last little bit. Right, I know. Last little bit. And this is something that I thought about the other day, so I thought I would ask you guys and see what you guys thought. So, we know that ancient people, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,000 years ago, had knowledge of the planets. They knew what they looked like, they knew the colors, they knew how they acted, they knew the personalities of the planets. Usually, they were deemed gods of sorts. How did they know? Because when I look up into the sky, and when you look up into the sky, you cannot see the planet with your naked eye. You can't. You might possibly, maybe see a little slightly different colored dot in the sky, but you don't see the planets. Definitely, you definitely do not see them enough where you can describe exactly like the personality of the planet, what it looked like, how big it was, any of that. So how did they know? How did the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans know what Mars and Saturn and Venus looked like? And how was it accurate? Explain it to me. Now, again, this is not that long ago. Okay, this is not that long ago. This is, again, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, etc. years ago, which in the grand scheme of things is not a long time ago. How did they know? Because you can look at the moon, right? You can look at the moon and you can see the moon most days, especially when it's really big. You can see the moon. How did they know? My theory is because mainstream history, the math just isn't mathing. Okay? The logistics aren't logisticking. Okay? Listen, this is my theory. Before the Greeks came the Akkadians. The Akkadians talk about the time before the moon. They didn't say that they didn't have light. They didn't say that. They spoke of the time before the moon. As a matter of fact, they did have light. They, in fact, had a big ball of light in the sky. It was not the moon. It wasn't the moon. Maybe towards the end, like once it got to around the 2000s, before the 2000s, maybe then. But it was not the moon. Saturn, yes. Venus, yes. Mars, yes. Those were all clearly visible in the sky, just like the moon. In alignment. As a matter of fact, back then, Saturn, Mars, and Venus were locked in tidal alignment with the Earth, not the moon, not the sun that we have today. Saturn, Mars, and Venus. Saturn, Venus, Mars. All three. You can see them in the sky. Just like you look up in the sky and see the stars and the moon today, you can look up. Right there. It's right there. It was right there. Mm-hmm. Do you understand what that means? That means, first and foremost, the sun and the moon that we have today is not our sun and moon. It is not the original sun and moon that the earth came with, right? The gravity that we have now is not the same that we have then. The reason why we do not have megafauna and giant people and etc. like we used to, and we still have some pretty big animals, okay? But the reason that we don't like we used to is because the air is different. The oxygen is different. The atmosphere is different. Space itself is different. Our moon and our sun are not the same sun, moon, and sun that Plato looked at, that his contemporaries looked at, that the people that he studied looked at. It's not the same. And then you think about all the disasters. Just think about all the natural disasters that happened in ancient times. Think about the fact that they could see the planets clear as day 3, 4, or 5,000 years ago. And then towards the end of the Golden Age, with ancient Rome, ancient Greece, Mediterranean, everybody, everywhere, they got the moon, they got the sun, some stuff went down, and here we are today. Right? So the Akkadians speak of their ancestors when the sky was, I told you, like I said, the sky was almost touching the ground. The sky was in the clouds and everything that was in the trees. Right? And then there was no sun. So there was no moon. So it wasn't heat, blinding heat, or freezing cold. It was tropical. Nice, warm, cool, light little rain showers. So what happened? They didn't have the telescopes and stuff that we had. Well, allegedly, they didn't have. We don't know. They had robots. Dude, they had robots. Like 3,000 years ago. Stop playing. So I'm quite sure there is a huge possibility that if they had robots, and they did, like they had robots and self-driving chariots, i.e. cars, they had all of that stuff. So there, it is possible that they had a telescope to look at it. But what's even more likely and more possibly and historically accurate, like actually historically accurate, not like this mainstream history, but like actually historically accurate, is they could see it. The Sumerians could see it. The Akkadians, again, those are the Greek ancestors. The Akkadians, they remember the time before the moon. These are the questions that you have to ask. Nothing that you've ever been taught is real. And time is running out. We can no longer afford the ignorance that plagues our society in general when it comes to our history, our truth, our government, or anything else that we are supposed to rely on. For lack of better purposes and phrasing, y'all gotta bite the apple. At some point, you gotta bite the apple and you gotta learn how to make the fire. This world is going to end and die if we do not get it together. We are going to go through another reset because we cannot get it together. We're going to go through another one. I want you to think about something. The Earth is allegedly, according to mainstream science, billions of years old. They have found works, skeletons, monuments, leftovers dating back 200,000 years. And you think that we, the main destroyers of the planet for the sake of comfort, we're the peak of civilization. See, the truth is that you don't want to think about is civilization has peaked before. Why else do you think we had indoor baths, heated floors, robots, toilets, everything else in ancient Roman times, ancient Greek times, ancient Sumerian times? We had all of that, but in the Middle Ages, they didn't have a pot to piss in. 10 family members bathing in the same water. Throwing excrement out of the window because they do not have plumbing. But yet also in certain places in Africa and other places at the same time simultaneously, they had plumbing. They had indoor baths. The world gets reset quite often, and I'm quite sure at this point the world gets reset in sections. The most offending sections get reset first, and then everybody either follows suit or they're next. Anyway, that's all the time I have for today. Thank you guys so much for coming and joining with me. I know it's a bit different today, but I really appreciate it. Bye-bye for now. Until next time on Architect Archives. Bye.